coaching. Kunoa coaching.
Welcome to the Kuno podcast today, everybody. We have got Moiz with us. Moiz, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
So we're going to do something slightly different on this one. We're going to talk about further education and PhDs and whether or not you should do one. So I'm currently doing a PhD at the minute, and I'm doing it in terms of compilation. So that means that I write lots of different papers, and then I can put these in and do an oral board, which is called a Viva. Is it a Viva or a Viva? How do you pronounce it, Moiz?
I would say Viva.
Viva, and then
Yeah.
you can get your PhD. And there's many different ways you can do your PhD. I'm doing mine my way because then I can do it as I'm working, so it makes sense for me to do it that way. And Moiz is here today because he does PhD coaching. So do you want to give us a bit of a background on kind of where you started and how you got into this?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. So I started my PhD back in 2011. And I've done a couple of things before that. So I have a background in software development and also in a business degree in a master's in business administration, so an MBA. So did a little bit of work in marketing, product development before my PhD. And then the PhD was in human-computer interaction, which I finished in 2014. And been working since then in the industry. And in the last 1 to 1.5 year almost now, I've been starting up my own usability consulting practice, a digital marketing agency, and also a PhD coaching practice. Yeah.
So the first question I suppose is, what does a PhD coach do, and what do you offer to people that are thinking of or actually doing a PhD?
Yeah, very good question. So the basic idea is that the PhD process, at least from my experience, it felt like there was a lot of learning along the way about how the PhD works also. So it wasn't just the research that you're working on, you're also learning how the process of research works. And I felt like it was the same thing with everybody who was doing a PhD with me in my research group or in the university. And many times we had similar questions, and we were all a little bit sometimes disappointed by how chaotic it is, because there is no defined structure that you're following, as opposed to the other degrees that you do, where you go to a class, you submit your assignments, and you graduate through every step. Whereas in the PhD, there's just one big chunk of thing you have to do, and you just graduate at the end. So as I was going through, it felt like we were all helping each other out in answering our questions and making sense of what works and what doesn't work. And also in my case, I felt like there was too much going on. I was working part-time while I was doing my PhD. So the full-time PhD with working 20 hours a week, and also had a family, so spending time with the kids and all. And on during really busy times, I would go to the university on the weekends, and I would take my kids with me. So it looks like almost an impossible thing to do if I look back how it all went. And I finished it in 3 years also, so that was also kind of good. But in the process, I ended up using a lot of tricks or tools to help me. And so while I was using those tools, I started sharing them with other people who were also dealing with similar problems. And the feedback I got from them sort of made me think that, okay, this is maybe more useful than I thought it is, and everybody needs it. And then those friends would ask me questions, and then they would refer other people to me. So it sort of became like a thing that I was helping other people out. And that's what triggered the whole thought process. And and I could see how helpful it could be. But it took me really a long while to cross the barrier of of actually considering myself a PhD coach in a way, and talking to other people about it. And yeah, in how in the PhD process, because you're becoming very academic, and you need to be very sure of what you're saying. So you can't make a claim until you have maybe published a peer reviewed paper. So so I thought that maybe of a coaching thing would not work for PhDs, because it's not that I haven't published papers on the process, right? So how can I make any claim which can be, how can I recommend something which can be generalized to everyone? So there were all of those questions going on. So maybe I was over analyzing, as we all do sometimes. So it took me a long while to cross that barrier, maybe, but I'm feeling now I think I'm feeling confident now that I can start sharing those things and people can benefit from them.
So it's probably worth saying that many people, when they get to a certain professional level, might have done a master's through work, or might already have a master's, and might be kind of thinking about doing a PhD to get, their doctorate, and to do a bit of extra, well, a lot of extra research into their topic. But also, it really does set you up to be able to manage large programs of research, because in a PhD you could be doing empirical research, you could be collecting data, you could be writing big reports, you could be managing people, you could be in a lab, and it sets you up to kind of go on into a career not only in academia but into industry as well, and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
manage programs. So I suppose the best place to start really with this is when I started my PhD, I was doing a second MSc in philosophy, and I was thinking I really want to do something in the area of artificial intelligence and philosophy. And I think I want it to be on interdisciplinary working. Let me pitch this. So I think I might have gone a little bit AWOL in terms of, I went and just tried to find a supervisor at a university that I'd already been at for my main degree and my MSc degree, and tried to pitch it to them. How do you actually start trying to get onto a PhD program, and what options do people have when they kind of think, right, I know I want to do the research, how do I get in to do that?
Yeah, good question. So I think one of the things that I spent a long time when I decided that I wanted to do a PhD, I took my time in deciding the topic. And and because I had studied a couple of different things, so back then I had just I was teaching global marketing at a local university at the time when I decided to do a PhD. So the first topics that came to my mind were had to do with marketing, or how global marketing is shaping up in the new world as we're more connected, and people are getting to see the brands from an international perspective more and more. So I felt it was really difficult for me to choose a topic, and I feel many people go through that process, and that's a big challenge. So I so that's an ideal position that you were mentioning, in which you were already doing a master's, and then that naturally progresses into PhD. So that's a very good thing. But in my case, that wasn't the case. So I had no idea what I really wanted to commit to, and I wanted to be sure before I took the step, because it was such a big commitment. I had been working for about 5 years by that time after my MBA, and going back to the university, and not just going back to the university, but potentially also moving countries in the process. So I wanted to be really sure of what I wanted to do. So I took my time in that, and I mentioned that also in my course. And so in the online course that I've published, I spent some time only on this topic. How would you be very sure of the topic that you're going to, or the area that you want to research in? So so yeah, so I went through that phase of really being sure, and 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 that sort of helped me, because I was so sure of what I was doing. that I feel helped me along the way to deal with other challenges. So you know how many life coaches also recommend that if you can figure out your why, then it's easier to answer the how and the other questions. So that's something that I feel is really important to figure out early in the process. You can do it ideally before you get started, but even after you start, if you can really understand why you're doing it, it just helps you so much to deal with everything.
This is a really interesting topic, because we've been speaking about this in the postgrad coffee sessions. When you
Okay.
figure out your why, and
Hmm.
then you figure out what it is you want to do, it's sometimes typical to get kind of into your research and then either lose your why, become disillusioned with your why, and then think, how do I carry on from here when I've picked
Yeah.
a topic? So it's not even that things might change before you start the PhD, but things may definitely change when you get into it. So how do you then kind of regroup and move forward?
Yeah, and I think that sort of ties in with the lack of structure that you are faced with in the PhD. And because most of us don't expect that and are fairly disappointed when we realize that, it's going to be me and myself and I who is going to drive it pretty much all the time. Of course, your supervisor is in it with you, but it's not their responsibility as such to really drive the PhD. They are there to supervise you, not yeah. So so because we are not prepared for that lack of structure, uh, and then we don't know how to deal with it, is what causes all these other issues. I feel that we sort of start feeling lost along the way. Yeah. So that's maybe the second big thing I recommend to everyone, that ideally before you start your PhD, already have your structure. And there are a few things that you need to make sure that you've got. Um, in short, what you want to do is you want to get used to wearing different caps, and one of them is sort of being your own coach. So you need to get slightly better at looking at yourself from a coach's eyes, and then looking yourself in the mirror and then talking to yourself and asking questions about how things are going, and this is what you wanted to do, how is that going, and you were trying to do this 2 months ago, how did that work out? And that sort of keeps your mindset in place, I feel. So that's one thing I sort of recommend. And then the other thing is about having a good support structure in terms of your team. You need people who are there, who understand what you're going through, and they are probably in a similar stage, maybe a little ahead or a little behind you, but they understand what you're going through because they're also doing it. So having that support team really helps. Maybe do a weekly catch up, like the coffee session that you were talking about. Those are really helpful, although it feels like it's taking you away from research, and it's taking you away from doing the actual work. uh, but as far as the mindset goes, these things really help your mindset stay in the right place.
You're listening to the Kuino podcast. If you want to ask a question to our experts, just go to kuinocoaching.com and you will find the link to the podcast where you can leave us a voice message or send us an email, and we will ask your question direct to the expert. That's kuinocoaching.com. Kuinua Coaching is set up to offer mentoring, coaching and courses in leadership, negotiation and soft skills. If you're interested in finding out more about what Kuinua Coaching has to offer you, you can get in touch via Facebook, Instagram. You can type Kuinua into Google. You can email us on kuinuacoaching@gmail.com or go to our website at kuinuacoaching.com. That's kuinuacoaching.com. I think
Yep.
you kind of, do you agree that I think you kind of know if you want to do a PhD? Because when I finished my master's, I said, I'm never, ever going back into academia ever again. And then about, I don't know, 2 years later, I sat on holiday and I outlined a thesis. And I was like, I really want to write on this. And
Yeah.
actually, what I wrote then is basically what I have actually written for the thesis. So it's worked out really quite well.
Mm.
However, I know that there are some people that come into PhDs and they come in and they just want the PhD, or they want to get funded to do a PhD, or they want a doctorate. And the problem is with that, I think, if you're not motivated by your own wanting to learn, you can
Mm-hmm.
really get very disillusioned. And it's like you're saying with the lack of structure, it's so easy to get really, really demotivated and disillusioned because you're driving
Mm.
yourself. There's nobody
Yeah,
there. There's nobody
yeah.
saying you've got a deadline, you need to do this. There's nobody. You're
Mm.
doing it because you
Mm.
want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, you're never going to finish it because it's
Yeah,
really hard work.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think I fully agree with that. And there's a similar story on my end as well. So I never thought of myself as doing a PhD ever. And and especially not in human computer interaction. So that was never an option or never something that I talked about or thought about. Um, I was going more the business direction after my master's, but it was only after doing that that I felt like, okay, now. So when I was starting my master's in business administration, there was so many questions I had about how the business world works, how companies form up, and how they become from a startup to a multi-million billion-dollar structure, and how you manage the whole thing. So there were so many questions I had, and it was a fascinating uh, a journey in understanding and learning that. So, and there were so many case studies we used to do, so lots of learning there. I in the process I realized that I don't like accounting and finance. No,
Nobody
not
does.
my.
I
Many
don't.
people do. Many people do.
Accounting, yeah, they do. Accounting and
Yeah,
finance people do. I'm not one of
yeah,
those. I'm not good at
yeah,
it.
yeah. So I remember struggling with balancing the balance sheet. Just didn't come to me. Just didn't come to me.
Oh
And
no.
that's what made me realize that it's something that is not coming from inside me, which is why I maybe it's not that I was dumb, but it was just not exciting enough for me in a way. I wanted to be more hands-on on creating something new. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that was a good lesson for me. And then I moved into more product development kind of roles, so non-technical work, but in the tech industry. And in that process I started asking some bigger questions. So interestingly, it was a non-technical master's degree for me, which exposed me to a world in which I started asking questions which were more technical and about how you use uh, any innovation. So when you make a new product, what are you trying to achieve it in terms of its use? And that's where the human computer interaction questions started coming in. And and then I started remembering exactly what I had studied in human computer interaction back in my bachelor's. So that sort of started to feel very exciting, and I could remember what I had studied back then. Uh, so when you look back and you remember some things better than the others, you know that these are the areas you enjoyed more. Yeah, so it was a process of discovery that I went through, in a way of realizing that, oh my God, human computer interaction is something that I'm reading up on. So whenever I open um, the technology news, so the things that I end up reading more are about how things are being used and what people think about them. So it's not about having the fastest processor or the largest memory in your computers. It's about how it appears to the user, and does it make their life easier or not. Those kind of questions. So so in that process, it was a very interesting turning point. It was like one day I wake up, and I still remember it to this day, that feeling. So I wake up in the morning and I just know it, that I have to now do a PhD in something, right? And it's very similar to how you felt when you were reading the thesis. And that was such a strong feeling that after 2 years of that, so it was a long process for me to go through. So I would say the day I realized that I wanted to do a PhD, or the day I felt the calling as such, it was only after about 2 years of that I actually started. So going through that 2 years already sort of was a proof for me that, okay, this is something that I am willing to commit to in terms of finding and spending time on. So although my actual PhD took 3 years, but because of those 2 years that I spent in trying to write research proposals, trying to reach out to supervisors all over the world and finding out where different labs are who work in human-computer interaction, um, applying to different universities, going through their admission processes, and it was a lot of work to do. Um, so so I look at it as a 5-year process rather than just 3 years of my PhD, because that 2 years all feels like I already started building my structure back then. So some of the tools that I continued to use in my PhD were actually things I started using during those first 2 years, and they ended up being so helpful for not just for myself but other people who I shared them with.
That's so true. I think it took me 2 years because I went back to do
Mhm.
my MSc in philosophy, and then I had to, like you said, go and find a supervisor. And writing a research proposal is not
Mm,
an easy feat. You have to have some
mm,
sort of an idea of what it is you actually want to write about and what you want to do. So then
yeah.
when you start contacting supervisors and you look for funding and eventually you get in, then when you get in, you think, oh my goodness, I'm on a PhD. That's it. This is fantastic. It's no, that's the beginning. So
Yeah,
you've
that's the
already,
beginning. Yes.
exactly. So you've gone through
Yeah.
2 years or however long of writing proposals and trying to get in.
Mm,
And you think, I know how to research. I did an MSc. I know how to
yeah.
do. Oh no. I mean, firstly, you've got things called ethics reviews that you've got to get through. Then you've got to collect some data. You've got to analyze it. You need to decide, you writing a 40,000, 60,000, 80-word thesis. Are you going to write papers? How are you going to do it? And you're trying to decide this when you've just
Mm,
got through the door into the university. You're getting told you need to do training. You've got holiday regulations. You've got all these different bits of paperwork being thrown at you in terms of guidance that you need to do. And then you start to think, well, hang on, when am I going to get any research done? Because all I'm doing at the minute is training and going through all this paperwork and handbooks.
yeah.
So after that kind of initial furore has died down and you've kind of
Mm,
gone, right, okay, I've kind of got my head around the handbooks, and that's going to take a few months just to get
mm, mm,
settled in.
mm,
Then you've got to start thinking about things like routine and time management. How do I read effectively? How do I write effectively?
mm.
And that's one of the kind of weirdest times I found, that you've got to really kind of set yourself up if you want to go, move forward. You've got to get a plan. You've got to, get time management in there. What are
Mm.
your top tips for that kind of time period of settling in and getting yourself together?
Yeah, so this is a slightly complicated one. It also depends on the individuals. You know how some people are better at time management than others.
Hmm.
So I am maybe not that good with time management overall.
I'm not
Uh,
either.
let me admit that. So so some so what I felt like was that there were a couple of things that help in general. One was to to not wait for the opportunity of becoming an expert in something and then talking to people about it, taking opportunities to just speak on topics that you already know, or topics that you will be doing research on. So for example, you could so there are so for example, I volunteered during the first few months of my PhD to give a talk on my research proposal. So again, it's just a research proposal that I'm talking about. So it's not about what I'm not about the results, but the background and what are the questions that I will be addressing. And it was a non-technical audience, so it was easy to do. They were not going to be asking too many technical questions, but I mentioned that here as a in the for us for something to do in the starting phases, because if you don't get into the right mindset starting off, then I've seen people getting lost and getting so demotivated that it becomes difficult to get back up again, right? So it's important to keep yourself from feeling too frustrated from the process. So few things that you can do, or one of the things that you can do, is basically uh, start talking to people about things that are easy to talk on, and take that opportunity to stand in front of people and tell them what you're doing, and that puts your again, it's all about the mindset, right? So it makes you subconsciously think that it's a process that you're going through. Today you shared something, and because you said to the people that this is something that I'm working on, so that automatically starts the thought process that okay, now next time I talk to these people, they might expect to ask, they might expect me to tell a little more about how things have gone from that first time that I mentioned things. And and that sort of fills in the gap. So the challenge is basically starting from scratch a PhD, and then going to reaching a point where you feel confident enough. And it's the middle part that is the tricky bit. And PhDs are difficult. PhDs are challenging things to deal with, and everybody goes to that down hill process, and then have to fight back up. So the trick is to make that as easy as possible for you. So that's one thing I sort of try to recommend to people, that in the start doing small things that are easy to do, but they sort of trigger a subconscious thought process, which fill in the gap along the way. And the other thing is about the time management that you were asking. And again, so that's the more tricky part, because it depends on the individuals. And one of the things I um, don't recommend for everyone, but for some people like me probably, who struggle with time management, is to start doing firefighting. It's something that I heard from someone a long time ago, but that's why what I ended up using for my PhD, and it sort of worked, because there are so many things to think about every day. Especially because in my case I had moved countries, so the life slash admin side of things, you're trying to understand how the city works, and how the transport works, and how so many other things that we take for granted when we're just living in the same place. So how do you handle so many things going on? And the firefighting methodology, or I don't know if it should be called a methodology or not, but I think it is a method, because it requires practice to be good at. But that's something I recommend to many people. I wouldn't say to all, because it doesn't work for all of them. Is that if when you wake up in the morning, just look at the biggest problem that needs to be solved that day. So, for example, in my case, it would be that I have a tutoring class at maybe around noon or earlier. So that's the biggest thing that I need to work on right now when I wake up in the morning. So I just forget everything, just prepare for conducting a tutorial. And once the tutorial is over, so I take a deep breath and I say, okay, what is the next big thing that needs to be dealt with? Okay, so tomorrow morning I have a meeting with my supervisor. So he's going to be asking or getting an update from me. Okay, so forget everything, just prepare for that next meeting only. And that's where I would just, close down everything, shut down my mind in a way, and just get things done that can be shared with my supervisor and get his feedback. Of course, you don't get things done all the time, but that's just the nature of things. And it's all about doing the most, as much as you can, basically, in the process. So firefighting is one model that worked for me. I don't know if it works for you or not, but give it a go if you want, and tell me how it works out.
I think in the first year you've got no other option, because you've got
Mm,
everything flying at you, and you
mm,
haven't got a choice. You've got to just, what's the next important thing. And I think that after that part of it, there's a huge dip where it kind of, oh, I've got in and I'm really happy. Oh no, now there's loads and loads of paperwork. Oh, I can't get the ethics review through. What on earth am I going to do? And then once you've done that and you start to come out the other side and you've read quite a bit about your area and you're starting to get into it and you're starting to do talks and you're starting to build up your research portfolio, moving towards writing it up, there's a bit of a, oh, I'm a bit happier now. I can see a bit of progress. Things are starting to come together and I'm getting my writing started. And then you kind of start noticing the connections between what you're doing, and you start noticing that you're doing things that you actually really enjoy, because you're allowed to kind of adapt the PhD to where you want to take it. So you can do that as well, and you can make it more enjoyable. And then once you've written some papers and you started writing the thesis, it's like, oh, now I'm back where I was when I got in, and I feel really happy because and then there's probably another dip where your papers get rejected and your talks get rejected, and then you put them in again once you've edited them, and then you come back up again and you say, oh, I'm really happy again. I've got this stuff done. And I think it probably goes like that and gets less and less, erratic towards the end, but it kind of goes in peaks and troughs. And then you get to the end and you submit and you pass your exam and everything's good. But it really is an emotional roller coaster. It is, and especially doing it with work as well, because I know a lot of people do this alongside work. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that potentially could be given to people that do it alongside work is try and take a week off and just do writing at some point, consolidate it, because I don't know about you, but doing a PhD around work is just really, really difficult in terms of trying to manage the time. How have you kind of found that? What advice do you have for people?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people who are really bad at switching contexts. So so let's say you get a phone call during your work. So it's not easy for me after the phone call. I can't go straight back to work. It takes a long while for me to stop thinking about the phone call, and the same thing then makes it difficult for dealing with whatever happens during your PhD. So in a way, becoming good at firefighting, which is why I say that it requires practice to be good at. So sometimes that can be a very useful skill. So that, for example, if you read, so if you're taking time off to just write, okay, so that is the big, you then take it as the biggest fire that needs to be put out at that time, and you forget everything, right? So the way I look at it is that do not take the week off, because that puts your mind into maybe a state that says, okay, now I can do other stuff, and let's do everything that I haven't been doing.
Netflix.
Exactly. Yeah. So don't use the words that you're taking time off to do your writing. Okay, just say that writing is now become this big fire that needs to be put out. Okay, and that is the fire that I'm going to be putting out in the next 1 week, and that puts you in a more aggressive thinking process. You start thinking of, okay, how do I deal with this fire? Do I use a fire extinguisher from this angle, or do I bring in some help? Call in
The fire brigade.
fire brigade. Exactly. And you start thinking on those lines that, okay, this is what I need to get done. How do I need help in this? Sometimes you need some help. You need people to read your whatever you're writing, and knowing that, okay, somebody is expecting to read what I'm writing today, again, puts you in a better state of mind. Other things that you can do is, have you heard of Pomodoro?
I love Pomodoro.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
such a
There you go.
productive. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're taking a week to focus on writing, for example, that's the time when you figure out the Pomodoro framework that works for you. For example, I started experimenting with it and then realized that about 40 minutes sort of worked for me better than the 20 minutes. It could be because of that context switching time that I require sometimes. So 20 minutes was the time that almost I needed 15 to 20 minutes to get into the flow. And then I do like a solid writing burst for the next 20 minutes. So that 40 minutes seemed like a good time for me. And then I would take a 5 to 10 minute break. And sometimes I would do this with another colleague at the lab, and we would start together, and then 40 minutes later we would just touch base for 5 minutes and just have a chat around whatever is happening in life, or just share about how the Pomodoro went. And then 5 minutes later both of us would go back to our writing desks. And so all of those things can be really helpful in that process.
And for anybody that thinks that Pomodoro sounds a bit naff, that's exactly what I thought when I started it. And actually,
Mm,
my productivity went through the roof when I engaged with it. So I really like my Pomodoro is probably 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes for normal tasks. But for
yeah.
writing it, I think it's about an hour or 2 hours and then break, because I need that solid
Okay.
amount of time. If I'm going to
Yeah.
write, I jump into it and I write. I know some people like to do it half an hour writing, they like to kind of do it like that. But I like to do all the research and then just put it all onto the page in one go so that I can then
Mm-hmm.
get feedback. Because the main kind of really good benefit actually about doing this is getting the feedback. So when you present things and you write the papers, they're nowhere near perfect when you first do the draft. They're absolutely, they can be really, really bad. But it's the feedback that you get that enables you to either go and restructure it, think through your
Mm,
ideas, do something different. So I really, that feedback thing is this is why I'm finding it difficult being distance learning at the minute, because I have to send the documents off and they have to get noted up, which means I have to be a lot stricter with deadlines. But that feedback is helping me really make something useful out of the materials that I'm putting out.
cool. Yeah, and just to maybe add on that, the other useful thing that I mentioned also in the online course that I've published is the so people who are starting their PhD, they should get into the habit of reviewing things that others have written.
Mm-hmm.
So just read maybe a little bit every week and try to review it. Just write down a few lines reviewing it, and that then makes you a better writer when you start writing yourself. Reading other people's research, just reviewing it, just thinking about what they were trying to say and what they could have improved there, or what they did really well in their writing, that ends up making you a very good writer as well. And you sort of almost start enjoying it. You feel like, oh my god, this is looking like a piece of art that you're sculpting with your hands in a way, and that's a good feeling.
It does feel like that. It's really good. Like in the beginning, reading feels like a chore, but once you get used to
Mm,
doing it efficiently and highlighting the bits that you need, it's
yeah.
easier then once you've got a lot of papers to just come back and look at what you've
Mm,
highlighted
mm,
and then work
mm.
through and start writing your own kind of spin on it.
Yeah, it's almost like a baby that you're slowly creating along the way.
It does really end up feeling like that.
It is,
So,
yeah.
Moiz, we're coming up to the end of the interview, and I wanted to say thank you so much for coming to the interview, because I know it's really, really early for you. So it's been a pleasure to have you on. Would you like to kind of give any final thoughts and then let us know where we can find you on the internet?
Sure. So, I guess a general thought is for everyone is that we're influencing the world in some way or the other, whether we are conscious of it or not. Um, so just realizing that almost makes you feel empowered. And when I started looking at myself that way, that oh my god, I am influencing so many things around me, it puts you in a very positive mindset. So that's just maybe a general thought, but it also specifically applies to PhDs on a more deeper level. That in terms of the influence, you are really doing like the highest service that you can do to humanity. You are creating new knowledge, so you should really feel proud of it and enjoy that process. So that's just a general thought, I guess. And yeah, on your other question about the best way to get in touch, so I'm fairly accessible on email and LinkedIn uh, for a quick chat or a question, and I do take time to personally respond to all messages. It might take a few days to get back, but I do get back to everyone, and always happy to share experiences and learn something new along the way. And that's one reason I like doing the PhD coaching, is that I can stay in touch with the new stuff that is happening in different areas, and getting to know like-minded people who are passionate about creating new knowledge. And yeah, if you end up doing the course, then of course we have group calls that we do periodically, and also one-to-one calls if needed.
And all of this will be linked below on the podcast or on the YouTube, whichever platform you're watching from. And if you're on the YouTube, you're looking at an amazing background at the minute. You've got some really cool native background that Moiz has put up. So yeah, all this will be linked, so you can click straight through and find Moiz, get some coaching, decide if you want to do a PhD. And if you are in the middle of a PhD, get some more advice on it. Yeah, thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was very exciting.
You've been watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform to the Kuno podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any amazing content, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Kuno Coaching.